Hello, my name is Karen Lacrosse, and I represent Region 7 on the Individual Events Committee. Today, I will be discussing our limited prep categories. So let's talk about our limited prep events. Sometimes these categories seem a bit more intimidating to judge because there are a few more rules and time constraints. Unlike the scripted PA events, these students are speaking more off the top of their heads. They're giving a different speech in every round they perform in, and they don't know what the prompt will be ahead of time. They may have a loose idea about an overall theme, but they don't know the exact nature of what they're going to be asked to speak on. So, first of all, let's look at broadcasting. Broadcasting is a category where you're seeing a student perform a 5-minute newscast similar to if you were to turn on the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news. The way we're currently doing broadcasting is that students are prepping their own broadcast and bringing it to the tournament. The ballot states the broadcast should be a factual and accurate presentation of recent news. There's no specific date or time range, so you're going to see 6 different newscasts, and they might share some similarities in stories. It's common for there to be some big news items that happened in the past week leading up to a tournament that a student might put into their broadcast, but we don't dictate that the news has to be 48 hours old or any specific time period. Typically, students read news stories that they got from some outside source. They can be big stories that they cut down, but the words are not their own. What is their own is an introduction and transitions from story to story. What makes this a limited prep category is that in addition to bringing their broadcast on the day of the tournament, during each round, the student is given a surprise story that they did not prep ahead of time. They are required to insert either the whole story or a cutting of that story into their broadcast, along with an editorial they wrote about that story, which is approximately 1 minute in length. This is the part of the broadcast where we're testing the student's ability to cut and insert a story in a confined amount of time, and then also respond to that story. They usually make you aware of where they've inserted the story, and as a judge, you have access to see that story ahead of time so that you know what you're looking for. You need to stop by the prep room to pick up a copy of the editorial story and familiarize yourself with it before the round begins. The student must use this provided story for their editorial. They are not permitted to choose their own story. Also, as the judge, don't forget to keep the round moving so that all participants have similar prep times. If your round starts dragging, later speakers will get more time to prep than the first speakers. One last thing to remember is that local conditions such as weather and traffic are allowed as part of the broadcast, but commercial content is not allowed. The next category that we will be looking at is extemporaneous speaking. In extemp, students don't know what they're going to speak on ahead of time. They actually get 3 questions, typically based on current events. They could be domestic policy, foreign policy, something specific like US-Russia relations, pop culture, science, technology, or sports. The topic can come from anywhere. Students do not come up with their own original topics. Rather, they draw 3 topics from the 10 or so provided in the prep room, choosing one to speak about. Students are expected to base their remarks on factual material, and they should interpret the facts in light of their own personal experience and thinking. They have 30 minutes where they get to use the internet and sources they've compiled to do research and get a response ready to the question they received. Students are not allowed to confer with anyone during the prep time. They typically write an outline, but may deliver their speech from a manuscript, memory, an outline, or any combination. They'll probably practice their speech at least once before they enter the performance room. After their prep time is over, they present a 4 to 7 minute speech to the judge. These students come to the performance room one at a time, staggered 7 minutes apart. The questions that you will see will all be different. No student speaks on the same question. They might have a similar umbrella topic for that round, like US-Russia relations questions are given in the first round, but they're speaking on different things. The questions can be yes/no questions. Will this happen? Should this happen? How did this happen? They aren't necessarily asking the student to know all the answers, but to use academic thought and research to help answer the question. During an election year, it's common to see a question like, who will win the 2024 presidential election? We're not expecting a student to know the answer to that. The way a student answers that question is by looking at the current research, looking at the current polls, looking at the current spread across the United States to say, hey, we don't know. These are the factors that are going to determine it. Or it looks like right now this candidate is showing a great lead because of these things that have happened. This can seem intimidating, especially if you don't consider yourself somebody who might be up to date on all the current things. You don't have to know all the things to judge this event. It's also the student's job to explain or illustrate the question that they received. So if they get a question about a certain recent interaction between two world leaders, I would coach my students by saying, you need to bring the judge up to speed. You need to give them some quick background as to what happened. Explain why you even got this as a question. Give them some context and then explain it. I would train my extempers that it's their job to educate the audience just as much as it is to answer the question. So as a judge, that can be a way that you give feedback. If you're lost the entire time, you could write a comment that you wish the student would have given some context for understanding. If you think about it, anybody who has to give a speech in front of peers or on the news or anything, this would be an expectation, right? I want to encourage you to try to judge this category, even if it's not your inclination to do it at first. It's really not that bad. Next, we'll look at impromptu. Let's see. Impromptu students are given a prompt, which is a quotation, an image, or a resolution. A resolution is a statement that is made in an affirmative or negative way, and the student will choose a side. An example would be resolved. Students should be required to wear uniforms. That's a resolution. That's the statement. It allows a student to take either side or give context to that resolution. In most cases, the impromptu prompts do not direct the student in any particular direction. As a judge, during a round, you will actually see different speeches all on the same prompt. Students don't watch the person going before them because they're all going to speak on the same prompt. So unlike the other categories where you watch different topics, these students are all speaking on the same topic. They have a total of 6 minutes and they get to use that 6 minutes how they want to. Typically, a small percentage of it is used to prep, which is to think about the prompt. Maybe jot some notes down, gather their thoughts as to what they're going to say, and then the rest of the time is taken up by standing and speaking about the prompt. Sometimes that's an opinion. Sometimes it's explaining it. Sometimes it's just responding to the prompt. We don't require the contestants to respond in a certain way. Often for that 6 minutes, you're going to see people prep anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes and then speak for the remaining time. Typically, the speech is still going to have some sort of organized framework like a sales or an informative where they have argument, organization, and development. Then they might respond to it. If it's a quotation, they might explain the quote. They might give it context. They might agree or disagree with it. Then they might give some examples to help illustrate their thoughts about that quotation. Those examples might be personal. They might be from literature, history, or current events. And that brings us now to our final and our newest limited prep event, duo commentary. Our goal with duo commentary is for 2 students to provide a perspective on a topic. They are essentially going to work together to try to provide that perspective. Competitors go into a preparation room just like an extemper would, just like a broadcaster would. And in that time, they're going to draw from 10 topics. They're going to pick 3, just like an extemper would. They pick one of the topics, and that topic is usually pretty vague. It can have unique wording. What they have to do is they have to provide their perspective on that topic. Just like extemp, they have 30 minutes to prepare, and they may use the internet and sources that they've gathered, and they may not confer with anyone outside their duo. You as the judge need to go to the prep room to pick up a copy of the topics for your round and get the list of speaker order. When presenting, students just have to explore their topic thoroughly. They need to defend their points with analysis, and they need to support it. When the duo presents to the judge, they must do it from a seated position, and they can only use notes they made during their 30-minute prep time. There are many approaches students can take during the delivery of their speech. They can pretend as if they're in a podcast or some sort of talk radio type thing. Some people approach it more as a point counterpoint where they'll say, we're looking at it from almost a debate perspective. So they just have to have the creativity to approach it how they want within the 4 to 7 minute time limit. Something to note, unlike the interp categories with more than one person, in duo commentary, students are allowed to make eye contact with each other. So one last thing about all of our limited prep events, Students are to remain in the competition room after their performance until the end of the round. So that is our limited prep categories. Let us know if you have any questions during your Zoom meeting.